Are we live? Hello? The moment, so it's just taking a few minutes. Hello, we are live on Facebook at the moment. We are live on Facebook at the moment. Thank you, everyone, our followers, those who follow Mind, Body, and Soul. We are live this evening again with Musawo Justine Nakimuli Kigozi. We have a panel of distinguished people in our community. For all who know me, this is Mental Health Live for Black and ethnic minority communities in the UK. And we've got a lot of people following us, not only in the UK, in other countries, but obviously interested in our live stream. Thank you for joining us this evening. So this evening, I have got Dr. Raj, who will introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Justine, and hello, everyone listening on Facebook. First of all, Justine, thank you very much for inviting me on the program. My name is Raj Magdula, and I'm a consultant psychiatrist in the NHS. I am a general adult psychiatrist, and I've now been doing psychiatry for over 20 years. I think that would be about sums it up. My experience is while adult looks over the developmental span and the effects of different experiences on child mental health. So being on the sharp end on the wedge, dealing with acute mental health, I hope I can bring some of my knowledge and understanding and learn during this program. So thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you, Dr. Raj. Mrs. Ssali, can you unmute your microphone and quickly introduce yourself, please?
Oh, hello, viewers. My name is Rose Ssali, and I live in Greater Manchester. I run an organization called Support and Action for Women's Network, and we're all about supporting women and their families to be inclusive, to be included in issues that concern them. And I'm here to talk about the women's take on today's topic.
Thank you, Mrs. Ssali. Mr. Enoch, if you can quickly unmute and introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Musawo Justine. I'm glad to be here. My name is Enoch Kiyanga, and I'm a journalist by training and a community leader here in Manchester. I'm a very hands-on person, and I guess that's why you may have invited me to this program to share some of the experiences I have whilst interacting with the community here in Manchester and the UK in general.
Thank you very much. And if we can have our youth leader, Mr. Michael Okello.
Hi, sorry, I just got another call. Yeah, my name is Michael Okello. I work in IT. I'm an IT professional and have an interest in the welfare of the youth, especially the youth in diaspora. So I'm interested to see how I can bring my experiences from the IT profession into helping the youth of today, and especially surrounding the mental health issues that are becoming prevalent within our different communities.
Thank you very much. So our topic today was prompted by recent research and I know this research was done by a lovely young lady called Mahmood, and there was a discovery that even the diaspora, there's a culture shift. And basically what's happening is that there's issues with values, there's issues with how the amount of time we spend with our children, and in the long run, our children have become a subject in mental health services and in prisons. So Mr. Enoch, I know I sent you a quick question on, as a community leader, why do you think we are seeing more toxic separations, divorce lately, with children left to fall back on one parent? Why do you think we're having a lot of that in the community?
Thank you, Musawo Justine, for that question. And I wish to state from the fact that since we are looking at the culture aspect, just to refresh our memories where we come from in Uganda, the culture setup caters for a strong foundation for a stable family that supports all the family members, including the children. And we've got sayings to demonstrate this. One of them is omwana omulenzi abba ne kitaawe, omuwala asira na nnyina. Meaning that...
Can I just explain that in English so Raj can... Okay, you can explain it in English.
Yes. That demonstrates that when during child raising in the family, the mother and father have appropriated roles, that the mother is assigned to mentor the girl child and guide the girl child, take a lead. And then the father is also assigned to take a lead in mentoring the boy child into a responsible man. And then we have another concept of a community child upraising. And you may have heard about this, that it takes a community or a village to raise a child. Meaning that in addition to the roles and family setup that is meant to cater for the upbringing of children, we are also expecting the community to take part in upbringing a responsible adult. You know, when we are growing up, if you stepped up out of your house, it doesn't matter whether your parents are anywhere inside, but any adult in the community would have a role to guide you and bring you up as a responsible adult. And also we've got our cultures are also built into the ingredients of shame, the ingredients of shame. I mean, each family would feel very proud to raise successful children, to be stable, and express those behaviors whilst in the community. So we had also this concept of omwana wani. Whose child is that? Who behaves like that? Whose wife is that? Who behaves like? Whose husband? You know, the idea of being proud of your name, family name, and status. But obviously, when we come here in the UK or in the diaspora, the dynamics change a little bit because we find a different terrain, especially culturally. And you find that those roles that have been brought up to play and form a stable family somehow get mixed up when we come here, especially when we get these pressures. As immigrants, we have pressures of looking after families, the family here and the extended family in Uganda. So you find that there are a lot of pressures between couples. And it's not very rare for couples to hand over to each other at the entrance when one is rushing for another shift, long day, and the other one is going for a night. And you find that for the whole month, for the whole week, the couple has not sat together to sit with their families, to sit with their children, to know what's going on actually in the home, the basics of the home, because of those kind of pressures. And obviously that one breeds a lot of problems, challenges with the children because they have not been catered for, they have not been appropriated, their roles and that kind of thing. So what we are trying to do as a community, we are trying to bring the community together through these meetings, mobilize them, and discuss these challenges, and also come together to find a way forward together as a community. So that's the role we are playing here. If you remember very well, we have also organized seminars for the young children. You remember when we had
I think we've lost Mr. Kiyaga's signal there. We've lost Mr. Kiyaga's signal. I wonder if during this moment, Mrs. Ssali, you can jump into this this role where, of course, your question was around how has the male personality manipulated the woman's cultural upbringing of being submissive, and used this to become psychological abuse, physical abuse, but also how has the woman in the diaspora ended up the main, luggage bearer of the whole family. The woman is working 24/7 and looking after the children, parenting the children, while the father could be an absent father, Mrs. Ssali.
Oh, thank you very much for that. And I hope we will be able to get Enoch back. And you asked me to talk about the woman's position in the family. And for me, I see the woman as the glue of a family. And I see the woman as somebody who holds everything together. And a woman is that piece that completes the puzzle. And I'm not saying men's roles are not important. I'm not saying men's roles are, as a family member, are not that important. However, the woman, if a woman is missing in a family, things fall to pieces, because it is our nature to nurture, to hold things together. It is our nature to be caregivers. And looking at the recent events in America with George Floyd, when he was dying, he called for his mama. And it really, really, really upset me to discover that his mother has been dead for 2 years. Because even in that last hour, he called for his mother. So even if you look at animals, our role is very, very significant. But what happens when that position changes? When did you ask me to talk about the role of women, religion, and culture? Religious, in the Bible, or as a Christian, I'm a Christian, we are expected to be a Proverbs 31 wife, a woman who is submissive. You have to listen to your husband. He's the head of the house and all that, which is perfect, if your husband is an Ephesians 5:25 husband. It works well. If he is the husband, because the Bible says he's the head and he has to treat you and love you and value your worth, regardless of your imperfections. So if you're the Proverbs 31 wife and the Ephesians 5 husband, things will work out well. However, sometimes it's not like that. Culture-wise, what Enoch was saying, There's another saying in Luganda, which goes that omwana omubi avumya nnyina. So if a child turns out well, they belong to the husband. It's the husband's wisdom and everything. If they don't turn out well, you're to blame the woman. So it doesn't really matter who's there or not, but that's how unfortunate it has been for us. So because of that, women have been forced to conform. We've got so many people, because about 8 years since last November, I resigned in November from an organization called Africans Unite Against Child Abuse, where I was the center manager. And it's the premier organization for safeguarding African children. We had about 5 referrals a week about issues relating to children and family issues. And very many people, when it comes to what you've asked me to talk about, Justine, people rather remain in unhappy marriages than get out because of religion, because of culture. Unfortunately, we've been programmed to put everybody else first instead of you as a person. So it has resulted in 2 women, even ended in death because of marriage. Others, there are very many absent parents, especially the man, but the woman plays both roles and still not recognized as the main caregiver by the family, the extended family. So because of that, all these circumstances have made women to become victims and in unknowingly make their children victims. And because of that, we've seen very many children who rebel, when they're growing up, they exhibit it in different ways. And some of them, you see it through anger. When children become teenagers, you see the anger of, why did you let me grow up in that environment? Others, they go to the farthest university they can find to be away from the parents. And others, it shows in their underperformance, children's underperformance, and others become emotionally unstable because they've looked at their mother who has not been able to stand up and leave an abusive relationship. So you have a child who grows up with lack of self-esteem and in turn becomes an abuser or accepts abuse in whatever. However, this relationship between the husband and the wife has to be looked at from starting from the personal perspective. People should be taught to value themselves. The women, we are in Africa, I will speak for Uganda, women, we are supposed to be subservient to the husbands. That's the best marriage ever, where you have to listen and give him all your money and, not be able to do things for yourself. And unfortunately, that's what happens. And we see it in families. You asked me to talk about what I've seen about my experience in the impact on children and families. Like I said, we had 5 referrals a week. Now where I work, we still have at least 2 referrals a week that involve children, that involve domestic violence, and that involve separations. Sometimes parents, use children as pawns in their relationships, that if we are not together, you won't see the children. And they don't think of how it will impact the children, but rather how it impacts themselves. And because of that, we find that children suffer the most. Children suffer the most, whereas it wasn't the intention of the parents, especially the mothers. And men have used this position to abuse children, women even further, because unfortunately, from majority of the women I've seen, we look for support. Women look for support. Women look for help. Men don't. So men cover up their issues because they don't look for help, and then they bring them out on the women. Women, we look for solutions. We talk to friends. We have a little gossip, and that's our way of dealing with things. Whereas men just bottle up things and then bring it out on their wives and children. I think there's something about the law on domestic violence that's been updated recently, whereby now a child who witnesses domestic violence is treated as a victim of DV. And I'm very happy with that, because I watched a clip on Facebook where this man was hitting a woman with an iron. And as she was trying to run, I heard a child whimpering in the background. And that child, although she didn't take the blow directly, this child took that blow, the mom's blow, emotionally. So I'm very happy with this law. And I hope our people come out and recognize that the first thing for us, for our community to improve, is to recognize that when you need help, nobody is perfect. All the marriages that we see, nobody has a perfect marriage. A perfect marriage is where there's communication, where people talk about things. And the roles, like Enoch said, they kind of merge when you come to the UK, because it's not kind of set. When I was in Uganda, I did not see a man once with a child on their own taking them anywhere. I didn't see it once. It's always with the mother, it's always with an auntie. So when we come here, if the wife has just given birth, the man should step out and help with the baby. You know, it doesn't take away anything from you. It doesn't make you less of a man. In fact, when your children watch what you do, it even empowers them more. So our role as women needs to be supported by our husbands or partners to become that Proverbs 31 wife, by them becoming the Ephesians 5 husband.
Wow, thank you, Rose. That has been well summed up in terms of religion, in terms of culture. You've just touched on it really, really well. Rose, where have the values been lost there? Because you pointed out values that you saw growing up in Uganda. And of course, have we lost those values when we came here? Has the man lost that being the head of the family, and all of a sudden the body is upside down because the woman has become the head and the man has become the body? What's going on? You hear all these stories of marriages in UK do not work. I'll go back to Africa and get a woman. But even when you get a woman from Africa, you bring them here, and 3 years down the line you ask them, where is that lady you married? And that lady is nowhere to be seen. What are we not doing right in terms of values that is gaslighting our children to end up part of mental health services and part of prisons? If you can quickly just sum that up in about 5.
Is because I've been married for 23 years now. And of course, marriage, there are ups and downs, but if your values, one of our values is Christianity. Our values, and for other values, one of the richness of our values is in Africa is based on religion. So those who are Muslim, they respect their religion, Christianity, respect Christ, and like what the Bible says, but also our culture, because our culture makes us us. And here in the UK, like Enoch said, those roles become intertwined because it's just you and your husband and children. So when sometimes what I've recognized as well is the women, because women, like I said, we look for help. We are more innovative, if I put it that way. So women get good jobs. They become nurses, they become social workers. So automatically they get paid more. And when they get paid more, sometimes the men, because Africa is a patriarchal community, they feel that financially this woman is not listening or doesn't respect them at all because she's making more money. And if you're making more money, then you know how to spend it more, better, isn't it? So also that brings problems because the woman kind of takes over financially, and it ends up being that sometimes she makes decisions without consulting the husband. And that's the biggest cause of issues and loss of values. So the other thing is, like Enoch said, we don't sit anymore around the table talking to our children because we work a lot. We feel guilty and reward them with these PS4s, take them out. And, instead of sitting with your children, watch them. Now like I've taught my daughter how to peel matoke. You sit down and you teach them to value the things you value. You can only pass on values. You can't buy them. So you need to sit down with your children and teach them what you do. Not tell them, but show them. And that's not one time, that's not 2 times, 100 times. That's when you'll be able to input some of your values on them. Same as respect. What you respect, your children will respect. What you don't respect, your children won't. And that's the same as relationships. What your children see a relationship like is very, very likely that they'll pick out some of that in their relationships. So it's only one way spending time with children for us to embed our values.
Wow, thank you very much once again, Rose. I hope you can stay online, because we've got some wrapping up to do in the end, but definitely a very good argument that you've put out there. Michael, we are going to you now. I know I can't see your video, but I'm hoping you can hear me. So Michael, you've heard what Enoch has said and what Rose has said. While parents are very busy working and sometimes arguing and trying to settle these disputes, what is your experience, pragmatically? How have children been diverted from a family unit into doing other things? And what are these things that they are doing that have led them to be part of mental health services or prison services, Michael?
Justina, I'm going to answer your question, but in a different way. Let's talk about what Enoch brought up, right? Enoch talked about the culture and the role of women, and he made a statement, right? Ssali touched on that as well. Now, when you look into the home, the child is a product of the house. So before we even start venturing out to why the child is gone down the wrong path, we need to look back into the house, regress a little bit, and look at trying to prevent that from happening. Because children, we're all different, we're all special. We all have different characteristics. So if you release us into the wild, we will do what Mother Nature has inclined us to do. So what shapes us is what or where we come from. So when we talk about the roles of the man and the roles of the woman within the family, we have to look back first into the mental health of a child is very, very much entwined with the family the child grows up in. And the roles the child takes. If I'm a boy child, I'm not watching my mother a lot. As I'm growing up, I'm noticing differences between me and my sister. I'm watching my father. If I'm a girl child, I'm watching more my mother, not my father, as I'm growing up. So it is very rare to find children under the age of 10, 11 with major mental health issues. But post that, that is when they start inhibiting the characters and the values they have picked up from the family they're growing in. So to look at trying to prevent this, we have to look at the family and what really constitutes a family. And when we talk about breakups, where is the wider family? Ssali, I'll ask a question, and the question would go like, when these children come referred to you, how many of them actually tell you that, you know what, granddad came and talked to my dad, or granddad came and talked to my mom? Because as a parent, viewing that my child is going through some issues, it is my right to try and help him correct himself, because I now know that the mental health of the children involved in the family will be impacted. So if I talk to my son, I hear his views, or I talk to my daughter, I hear her views, and then I talk to the partner as well. And if the other party does the same, talking to my child and to their child, the children then can actually be rescued much quicker before the age of 10, 11, when they start exhibiting their characteristics. That'll be the point I would raise for Ssali. How many external family members actually get involved before the children?
Can I answer that now?
Yes.
Right, because like I said, the children that we work with are children from African parents.
Yes.
And in all the 8 years that I worked with Afruka and now, I've only ever met 2 families, and I've worked with thousands that have extended family. And this is because all of us are first generation immigrants. My mother-in-law visits, but she hasn't been in 4 years. She's in Uganda. And the 2 families I'm talking about that had grandchildren, one was married to a white man, so that set of grandparents were involved. Then the other was a mom who had come with her mother, so the grandma was actually playing an immediate role of responsibility. Otherwise, it is very, very difficult for our children to have that extended wide community support because of the nature of the world we live in. And the grandparents actually are the community, people we meet in churches and socialize in social gatherings. Those are the parents, the people who they are now calling, my children have judges, white judges and Ugandan judges, because they don't have that extended family. So it's very, very, very difficult. And the only times they're with their grandparents on the phone, they're just saying nice things. So they cannot be really in a disciplinary role at all because of the nature of the world, unfortunately, we live in.
Thank you, Ssali. Now, recognizing that the children's mental health is impacted by the lack of the wider family, where is the culture to then support the family when the wider family is not there? Where is the culture to step in and say, because of the culture teachings, this is how you should behave. But not only this is how you should behave, we are also here to give you support. Because if the parents are lacking support, that already has an impact on the mental health of the children. The parents need support. We're looking at the children's mental health, but the parents need support from the community. Another thing we have in our community is we are ashamed of mental health. We're ashamed of mental health. And like Justina, I told you, I want to bring my experience from my work. Ssali, we do not blame each other, we work together. So in a family, although you have roles, your roles are to support one life, not 2 different lives. And within the family, there has to be a way to explain that to the children growing up. Because sometimes as a woman, you're there to support your husband. But the support you're giving to your husband should not be considered submissive or someone being submissive to their husband. You should look at that and qualify it as respect and being respectful. Because within the family unit as well, when you start talking, oh, the wife has to be submissive, no. we got to teach the children the wife has to be respectful. And likewise, the husband has to be respectful. Because when we now go out of your home and you go to your friends, if you're a Uganda woman, I've seen them in Kampala a lot. When an old woman comes, irrespective of how they're dressed, they'll kneel down on the side of the road and greet the woman and talk to the woman kneeling down, right? If you brought that scenario to the UK, why are you doing that? Why are you being submissive? So we actually come to a new environment. We're trying to play catch up, but we're actually intermingling the words submission and respect. So we should define it. Yes, it may look like I'm being submissive, but no. My culture teaches me, I don't care what position I am in, I have to kneel down when I'm greeting her. And they all talk. And I've seen scenarios where the old woman is saying, no, please get up. And the lady is like refusing to get up. That is not submission. But when viewed from the Western aspect point of view, and that is where the culture clash then starts coming in. Oh, my wife is submissive. No. And as a man, you have to understand, no, she's being respectful. So when it comes to like your side, you just had a newborn baby. If the man can cook, and I'll say this for all the men, most of the chefs are men anyway. If a man can cook and he can cook for the family, what example then is it teaching the children? And some of these issues need to be explained from within the family unit, and it needs to be done early before the relationship becomes toxic. And because the parents themselves need support, where does that support come from? It has to come from the culture. So moving backwards, we have to start accepting as cultural people that in the environment we live in, there are mental health issues. We have to start admitting it. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I can deduce one thing. When you break up, one person may be sad and angry, the other may be joyful. The person who is sad manifests everything through anger. But if you fester that sadness for a long time, it boils down and becomes depression. And if it keeps on boiling for a long time, it becomes a mental illness. And can you imagine as a child growing up in an environment where you're now supporting someone who's mentally ill? Will that depression not actually jump on you as well? But it all started out of sadness. When you walk it back, but that sadness festered so much it became depression. Manifested through anger, but that failed. People seek out revenge. And that is why I ask, where's the family when those issues happen? And if the family is not there, where's the culture or the cultural support? Because that will help save our children a lot. And Roz, it is very easy, although you work different times, Enoch mentioned it, to still sit down without the man of the house and have dinner together with your children. And likewise, it's very easy for a man to come back home and say, you know what, mom's working tonight, but we're all eating together. That comes from within the family. We should not look for, I call them excuses. And to me, every excuse is a problem which needs to be solved. You can still have that pattern of sitting down around the table and eating with your children, even if one party is missing. Because then the children actually start understanding and asking, oh, where is dad? Where is dad? Or where is mom? Oh no, she's working tonight. And over time, they understand you work different patterns. But they still also get the lesson that as a family, we sit down and we eat together. So the two main issues when it comes to the health of our youth have to be the family and the family support around relationships would break down. And it has to be the culture. And I would have been a lot more pleased to see other cultural leaders and other cultures to come and say, you know what, this is the kind of support we can give as a culture. This is the kind of support, because I know, like, you're in Manchester, Rose, I'm in London, Justine is in Liverpool, but in all those different cities, we have cultural organizations, and they should be the ones then supporting us rather than us relying on religion and other things, which are also then new to us, because not all religions are the religions we knew back in Uganda. So I cannot say that they're all good for us. But culture served us for eons, centuries. And we have to maybe now start looking at how we break down culture. Like I said, submission is not submission as such, it is respect and showing respect. And try and get those lessons out to our children so they grow up knowing that, yeah, I'll show respect, but I also know that I'm doing it because I want to show respect. I'm not being forced. I am in control, but I'm doing it because it is a way I show respect to my partner or to my brother or to my sister. So it's mainly for the mental health of the children. Before we kids start diverting into the different areas, I think we need to step back and look at where the family support and the family units are, be it grandparents, uncles, or whatever, and also where does culture fit in diaspora. And that will help our youth a lot more.
Right. Right. Thank you very much, Michael. That has been quite interesting. I've just been taken into it. So for all of you who are watching this evening, we are all about community engagement. We are all about supporting the Black and ethnic minority people understand mental health. But this month, most importantly, our topic has been Think Family. What's a family unit? How can we stop dividing this family unit and keep it together? Why our marriage is failing in the diaspora? Why is mental health increasing in the diaspora? But the theme again from most of our panelists is the fact that we don't talk about mental health. There's lack of communication. There's cross-cultural issues. I mean, we come from, I grew up in Uganda, you come from here, you come to the UK and the culture is totally different and you get mingled up and entangled into everything else, and it causes some sort of confusion. There was a lot of mentioning around values. What values are we passing on from our house to our children in school, on the street? And if you've passed on the right values from the household, your child will carry those onto the street, and we might not be able to see them in mental health services or prisons. We might, but you will have done as much as you can do. Our next panelist is Dr. Raj. Dr. Raj is a consultant psychiatrist in NHS, and he'll quickly introduce himself, but he will sum up some of the issues that we've had this evening, but also touch on the impacts of these issues on the mental health of young people or adulthood, because this might not happen, like Michael mentioned. You might literally not find a 6-year-old child complaining about depression or anything, but they might have to complain about that when they're 16 or 17. So Dr. Raj will tell us what that looks like at the moment and what the impacts are. Thank you, Dr. Raj, and you're welcome to Mind, Body and Soul.
Thank you very much, Justine. And thank you to all the panelists. Can I just say, I'm really happy I came on the panel, and thanks, Justine, for inviting me, really. I think it's been a very, very educative one for me also. If I may say, I come to this, I think I can just say now, with all I've heard on culture and mental health, perhaps I can come to it from two backgrounds, which I think, one, as being a cultural and economic immigrant myself, and coming from a different culture, isn't it, back in India, but my own experiences, but also as a professional in mental health and looking at the mental health of predominantly what I see, the white populations, but also understanding mental health in a cultural aspect. Before I talk about what we call mental illness, the term being psychopathology, as in the difficulties in mental health in young adults and adults. If it's all right, I'd just like to make two or three observations on what my other esteemed colleagues, our speakers, have been talking about. I think the first thing, what I've understood is how similar culture and values are across the world. I'll be really, it's been surprising for me to hear how similar it is. I think the traditional roles, the patriarchy, and some places where there are matriarchal societies also, I'm aware of those also. The traditional roles of the man and the woman, the husband and the wife, and how that percolates down and is taught to succeeding generations, to be honest, are similar in many cultures. Back in India, it's very much the same. When I grew up 40 years ago, there were rules, but things have changed. One of the things I think we have to recognize, and perhaps this isn't true in all countries, um, there are difference in, if we look back at a home place, be it Uganda, be it India, be it cities, there's actually a difference in culture and values between different sets of populations. So when we talk of traditional roles, it's perhaps more common in, if you look at between, we are agrarian economies, agriculture based. So if you look at villages and small towns, there these roles are held traditionally with a greater level of rigidity. But if you look at urban populations, when people come to big cities where there's a mix, to be honest, some of the confusion and challenges we talk about here, I'm pretty sure are prevalent there also. Why? Because of the internet, knowledge and things are available everywhere. So I think that's one interesting bit, because I do know now in urban India, things are very different to what it was 20 years ago. And actually, relationships are changing dramatically there also. Almost similar to, one could say, to the diaspora, what happens in the UK and Western societies. From a cultural aspect, the other thing to think about is that, and I think Enoch made the point, difference between cultures. I think predominantly, and I'm using, to just say technically, what we call non-Western cultures, or what we call social-centric, they are always about the society. Society's needs, and society is the greater good. But in Western societies, we are more individual-centric, what is called ego-centric. It's about the individual. So be it Africa, be it India, it's what society wants, what's good for society. Whereas here, what are my rights? Am I more important than what society needs? And I think as a result of that, you have these two differences between what is called shame, which Enoch mentioned, and that's a very important thing. So society shames you because you have not lived up to the expectations of what society expects of you in your role. Whereas here, people grow up with guilt. There is more guilt because here the individual feels they have not lived up to their own potential or what they wanted to do. And each of them actually create different levels of challenges. And the other part was, we talked about the family. I think obviously it's right. Back at home, you have the extended family, whereas when we get into a diaspora, it's more nuclear. You've just got the mother, father, or even sometimes a single parent with two children. And that does bring up its own challenges compared to what support an extended family can do. The third bit I just wanted to mention was about values. And I think what I've picked up, if I may say, is an anxiety. I would say more than a reality. I think when we come here and as we grow, we always have a fear that somehow values are being eroded, that somehow we are losing them. And actually, it's quite interesting. If you look at the diaspora families here, they are more rigid about the value systems, about the cultural norms, where they insist, for example, you must know these prayers, or you must know this, you must know exactly how this is done, compared to people at a hometown, in home, who are probably a bit laid back, because that culture and those values are all around. The society is always there, mirroring it. But here, when the child steps outside the home environment and goes to school, which is completely different, that mirror is not there. So we get that angst, I think, that anxiety. Oh my God, if I don't say it, if we don't really pass on those values and those cultural norms, this will be lost, and my child will become someone very different. But also, everyone knows values also change over time. I'm sure if you look at all of yourselves, we don't hold the same, our values have changed over our own 20 years and 30 years of experience. What we held rigidly early, we've changed over time. And I think we do pass on some of the values we've inherited, but we make our own values. I think that's very important to recognize. I'm sure our value systems are slightly different to our parents. If you look at a generational shift, we hold things and roles slightly more differently, even perhaps to our siblings who we brought up predominantly at home compared to us, who may be brought up predominantly in UK or in the US. And I think we must recognize that. That's not a bad thing. I guess it's just something natural, which happens simply because we are all individuals and individuals change over time. Now, coming to the impact of what does all this do to a family, how does it affect the both the mental health and well-being first of the parents and the adults, and subsequently what happens when now a child comes into this rather complex and complicated mix, because this is a very nuanced thing and there are degrees. Like Rose mentioned, some of them are absolutely, on one end of the spectrum: domestic abuse, violence in relationships, very strong traditional roles and expectations, which creates conflict. But in other places, it will not be evident, but it's still there under the surface. It will be in a lesser degree, but it does come through. And if you look through every family, there are different nuances, each which has an effect on them. I think the when we ask why are things changing, I think the main important thing is because roles change. When roles change here, usually there's an economic reason. You have to provide because things are not cheap, things may be more expensive. It's You don't get the same level of help as you may get at home, so you have to provide. And I think the important value which most of us are, because we are first generation have come here, we want to do something. We are wealth creators, not just for ourselves but also for a family back home. And we want to give the best to our children, which is our values of the best opportunity, the best education. And therefore you have to earn, because otherwise it's difficult to fulfill all those. So therefore it may not be enough where a single person earns, both have to earn, because there's an economic reason also as to why children must grow up, because we want to give them more than what we had, and we have that opportunity. So that brings the change in roles. But when there is change in roles, it clashes with the traditional understanding of what roles are, and that creates conflict. I think that's where it starts. And what Rose and Michael were alluding to, submission versus, is this submission, is this respect, how do you approach it? But I think the important bit is it's about understanding and respecting each other is really key. And I think one more thing, certain values I've realized are actually culture free: respect for each other, recognizing one's role, and teaching the child respect for elders and all, I think is culture free, because I think that is also prevalent. If you look and talk among people who are what we call white, traditionally white here, they also value similar things which we do. However, when divorce happens, I think it's quite traumatic for, it is a traumatic thing, and it would be rated as what is called an adverse childhood experience. Marital separation and separation, parental separation and parental divorce will be will have an impact on the child. I think there's no doubt about it. It has impact on the family. I think the important thing to understand here is every divorce is not necessarily always negative, because actually staying within the conflict, and I think Michael alluded to this fact, if you stay in a relationship which is toxic, where there is regular parental conflict, where there is domestic violence, but people can't escape, and Rose made a very good point of this, is that actually can be more detrimental than perhaps a separation, where the child then grows up in a more safer environment, where they have better chances. Because what makes it really impactful is the duration, the persistence, and the intensity of that conflict, and how much that child is exposed to that level of conflict and that level of either violence or negative experiences. The best way to understand the impact of how this affects the child and therefore adult mental health in the subsequent generation is, we have to look at it is, and there are studies here. If you look at developmental studies, they talk about trajectories. As in, let's start with a family in which there is a divorce. Now, during the initial part of the divorce or separation, it can be toxic, it can be, everyone's unhappy, angry. But if you look after a year or 2 or 3 or going up to 6 years after that divorce, so post divorce, many a time, in a great percentage, that conflict actually resolves. It comes down, it becomes better. And therefore, the child can then begin to get some level of normality, and perhaps that doesn't have a significant impact on the child's health. However, if there is a child which is growing up, even in a marriage where there's incredible levels of violence, abuse of any sort, and neglect, that child will then grow on to develop a lot of adult mental health problems, including childhood mental health problems. I think modeling is very important. We all learn, and children get their identity by looking at their parents and their near pet caregiver. Any caregiving person helps create that identity for the child. And when there is parental separation, which is good, uh, it's a very poor separation, very toxic separation, or it's a very toxic relationship, and the child is brought into that, it does shatter the identity and the sense of security for the child. Because all of us grew up thinking the world to be a safe place. But if that is shattered, then insecurities build up. Now, this can affect the childhood development in two ways. One, the emotional development, as in how the child begins to understand and emotionally cope with any stressor in the future. And the second is the cognition of the child, which is how the child begins to appraise, see, and understand any negative event. And I think both of them they're separate but interlinked. Growing up, looking back at the histories of what I've seen from my patients who actually present to me in adulthood, you see mixed when you talk to them, a lot of them have problems with, I think, straight away depression, anxiety. A large part of them also diagnosed with personality disorders. What does that mean? Is that means they lack trust. They can't trust themselves, they can't trust the world, they can't trust people, and therefore they don't have stable relationships because they don't believe that relationships can be stable based on what the adverse experiences have taught them. I think added to this is, unfortunately, a lot of them then begin to, from a young age, begin to abuse drugs and alcohol. And apart from that, there's also a high risk, what we call high risk sexual or high risk other behaviors. As boys, unfortunately, getting involved into gangs, losing their way, feeling ostracized or not belonging to any community. And for girls who will then, who can become also victims and also choose abusive relationships. And I think this is very important. People who are victims of abuse sometimes go to perpetrate abuse in the next generation, as well as they may choose abusive relationships because they don't have a sense of what stable relationships look like. And that has a significant impact on the development of that child growing up to become an adult. In the childhood, between 10 and 17, we're talking, as Michael said, from young children to adolescents, you do see, childhood attachment disorders, poor problems in childhood, what we call conduct disorder, sometimes attention deficit hyper disorder, and you'll also see childhood self-harm. You begin to see some of the forerunners and the problems that the child is beginning to develop. And into adulthood, these problems then magnify, where you can begin to see severe depression, anxiety, um, antisocial behavior, and along with emotionally unstable instability, to what we call borderline personality problems. I think there's another important factor of identity. In the midst of all this, let's not forget the child is not only dealing with their own cultural identity, they are trying to develop the identity in a completely different culture. And sometimes, as you know, they don't feel part of one culture. They feel ostracized from their own. Now take this child and go home on a holiday back home. The children there cannot relate to them because they are from behind. So you can begin to see this entire confusion for the child, forget adults themselves. Now add on domestic violence and abuse in a strange land, trying to get educational achievement. And sadly, for all our Black and minority ethnic groups, as we call about it, social disadvantage is already there in the form of racism, unconscious bias, all those roles. So you can begin to see the different levels of problems. And I think it's very interesting. If you look at not just prisons, but mental health units, the levels of people who are put under the Mental Health Act, actually Black and minority ethnic groups are overrepresented. So that again begins to tell you the challenge of all these problems here. So it's quite a complex mix, but we can begin to pull out some of those trajectories, and we should look at them in trajectories and development disorders. And I think that from culture, from background to relationships, all the way to the development of her, and of course, stigma. That is an important factor. So together, I think all these really, we can begin to see why our communities are so stretched. So rebuilding resilience is important. Community support is very important. I think that's especially where grandparents are not there, or regular contact with grandparents, because we don't have that, luxury. And also, I think the importance, eating, talking to the family, and telling the kids that our culture is also good. There's a lot to learn. Be positive and show them the highlights and values without telling them another culture is bad, because that creates confusion. I think giving them that level play field and balance, overall, that will help mental health and hopefully reduce the incidence of mental health in our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raj. Thank you very much. That has been well wrapped up. I've got a, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
All right. I've got a quick question for you here online, and it's from somebody called Enoch Kimboa. Enoch says, as first generation immigrants, how has our understanding of mental health played into this topic that you're discussing?
I think what we understand here in a first generation, we never spoke about mental health much in back home. You're right, because any illness, depression is considered mental weakness. I think traditionally that's how we've grown up. If you're depressed, you're weak. You're weak-minded, which is, pardon me, complete load of rubbish from where I sit. Depression is an illness, just like heart condition or diabetes or any other disease. Anyway, I think in first generation, two things happen. One is, if you come here, there is a lot of talk of mental health in the media. Organizations talk about it. There's more highlighting. Children learn about mental health in school. So actually, we may not know a lot, but our children who grew up in primary and secondary school may start coming and telling us we have classes of mental health. So there is that learning, how we learn. Sometimes from our kids itself, and awareness grows. But I think there is that conflict about, we've grown up in, from young to, say, I don't know, mid adulthood in our own communities back home. So accepting mental health and thinking that you want to go see a professional can still be quite challenging. And I'll be honest, this has got nothing to do with class or economic status among the immigrants. Across the entire economic spectrum, from lower income to higher income, I think that stigma is still a challenge. And we do go back to our own safety zones, that if the child is unwell, is it my fault? I need to cover this up and sort it myself. Going and speaking to a professional is almost an acceptance of failure, which unfortunately prevents us from taking help much earlier on. So I think that is where the complexity for first generation immigrants comes from. It is the awareness and how much people talk about it here compared to what we feel our own shame, but we can't talk it outside, and how the children perceive it differently. We are caught in that mix. So I think that impacts our overall understanding and our reactions to mental health.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Raj. So obviously you've talked about our reaction to mental health as parents. Do we talk about it? Do we see it as a problem? Do we still carry it as a taboo, as a burden? We all think about witchcraft, demons, and all sorts of things. How do we sell mental health to our family, friends, and relatives? That's very important. I think this question goes to Rose, because of course, Rose, you're dealing with women for domestic violence. Someone mentioned, do you think women stay in relationships because there is shame and guilt for not living up to society's expectations? Then they stay in abusive relationships?
Yes, I think I agree with that, because just going back a little bit to Michael's response to when I talked about submission. The kind of submission I was talking about was not listening to your husband. The kind of submission I was talking about was your husband refusing you to do anything. For example, work. I know very many career women whose husbands have stopped them from working. I know many women who do not have a say at all in the home, but have to listen, to agree with everything the husband says. That's the kind of submissiveness I was talking about. And we should not think of it as respect, because respect is not actually given, respect is earned. So it's not the same thing. I just wanted to clarify that. And going back to what you're asking is, yes, women want to remain married because they're expected to of society. And women who are not married are looked at like as, in fact, some men don't even want unmarried women to befriend their wives because you will become like them. So yes, I agree with the person who mentioned that. There is an expectation, a cultural expectation for a woman's pinnacle of success to be marriage and not anything else. So however successful you are in the African community and you're not married, it's actually looked at as a failure, or you trying to be insubordinate to your culture. So yes, I agree with that query. That's how it is exactly.
Mm, 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 mm. Thank you very much, Rose. Dr. Raj, Rose, everybody, I think we are having quite a lot of comments on Facebook. Thank you, Dr. Raj. Thank you, Rose, for your excellent input. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Dr. Raj. Somebody said thank you for your comprehensive answer to their question. So thank you very much. For those watching us today, this evening is our community engagement led by myself, Musawo Justine Nakimuli Kigozi, here in Liverpool. We have Dr. Raj from Manchester, I think. We have Rose from around Oldham, I think. Michael from London. And we had, unfortunately, our community leader, also those who know him, he's the Mukungu to the king of Buganda, Mr. Enoch Chaga. We lost him, but he's been with us. And we've had a wonderful topic of discussing marriage, relationships, and children caught in the middle in terms of mental health. We don't have any more questions here, but a lot of themes coming out in terms of values, respect, communication being important. Dr. Raj did mention in terms of immigration, stigma when we come here, but also mentioned that actually when we come here, we form our own culture, and we should be very proud of that as well, that, you know, we are in between. When our children travel back to where we've come from, they actually don't belong either. And if we don't help them to belong here, they will lose their identity and they will struggle with achieving in the community. As parents, when do we talk about mental health? How do we sell it to our children? I mean, in this country, it's well talked about mental health and well-being. Before you start looking after your whole body, start looking after the head first, and then you might have a better health. So how are we selling mental health and well-being to our children? Are we still talking about it as taboo? Are we still talking about it as witchcraft? Are we still talking about as demons? How do we sell it to our children? How much time do we spend with our children in terms of, you know, communication as a family? These are some of the things that our team today have been trying to explore and discuss. I don't know if on the panel there's anybody else who wants to say something, but it looks like we are running out of time, but we can have 5 minutes. Yes, Dr. Raj, if you can unmute.
I think, first of all, thank you, Justine. It's been a wonderful program, and thank you for giving the opportunity. And may I also extend my thanks to both Rose and Michael for their valued comments. And of course, we had Enoch. It's been a pleasure. I think one of the things you mentioned, Justine, I just want to say, we must be proud of ourselves, because we are a melting pot of cultures, and perhaps we are getting the best of both cultures. I think we really need to be aware of that and let our children know that sometimes not being completely part of just one culture, but being able to learn the best of other cultures is a gift in itself. It's example like what Rose said, traditional roles, have no respect for people and other things, but here you begin to earn respect and crystallize your role. That's probably what we learn more. And then teaching our children that just because we are here, there's a lot of good things back home, and being proud of our own culture. I think it's both a challenge, but also it's very rewarding if we do it the right way. And that will actually make our children perhaps far more better to meet the challenges of a globalized world, because we don't believe that they're going to stay here. They could move to any part of the world. So let's actually sell that as a strength and not a weakness. Thank you for that, Justine.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Does anybody else on the panel has something to say before we close this evening?
Yeah, Justina, I would just like to add on that. We're living in a world where things are changing. And I think if our cultural leaders here in diaspora grasp the opportunity to make little amendments to the culture they sell to the children, and that will actually make it in such a way that even when they go back home, they're not like really lost, but they still retain values from here. And that's why I was talking about submission and respect, trying to make a difference. And then it's easier to then sell the culture to know that, to really be honest, the woman's role is to look after the family. And if it means she has to go out and work, she has to go out and work. It has to be acceptable. So if there's a culture which still wants to retain the women back at home, then it has to be negated because we're now living in a different environment. And like the doctor said, even in India, in the urban areas, they're now beginning to have clashes between advances in technology and welfare with the restrictive maybe cultures from the past. So for the cultural leaders in the diaspora, it's a perfect opportunity to make perfect little changes because you have a ready-made environment who are bereft of where they can get extra support. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. That's wonderful. Thank you very much for adding that. Hi,
Yes.
Rose. Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, my closing comments would be about our community. And the best way to go about it is we've got so many broken families or families that come in different packages for whatever reason. Some of them are immigration, parents are not together. Other parents are here, they cannot work. Other parents are absent for no reason, for whatever reason they choose. There's still time to mend those things. There's still time for us to change and communicate and try to rebuild families in whatever way we can. And of course, where domestic violence is, there's a need to recognize and accept is the best way forward. So where families, there's broken relationships, there's broken communication, it's not too late to mend and change things, not just for us, but for our children.
Okay. Thank you very much, Royce, for that point as well. I want to thank everybody on the panel this evening. I can't take your time for granted. It's been really important that you've taken almost 2 hours out of your time to our live streaming this evening. I mean, Michael, thank you very much from London. Ro, thank you for your time. Enoch, I know you cut off. Dr. Raj, I don't know how I can pay for your consultant time, but it's been wonderful to have you for all that time. And thank you for accepting our invite to Mind, Body, and Soul. And for those of you watching this evening, we remain Mind, Body, and Soul for mental health in Black and Ethnic minority here in the UK and Center for Psychological Mental Health in Uganda. You know where we are. Follow us on Facebook. We've got a page, or subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive videos of mental health awareness. For those who know me, that's my passion, mental health awareness in Black and ethnic minority communities. Thank you for being with us this evening, and thank you for loving us. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful evening. Bye.